All right. So, she forgot that there was a class, and then she told Bill that she would be home after Minion, and then for some reason your spouse expects you to do what you tell them they're going to do. I don't.
Doesn't happen in my house.
No comment. It happens in mine. Of course, we're relative newlyweds, only 15 and a half years. So.
You're working on it, though.
Yes.
You're getting close.
Oh,
all right. So we start on page 567, and the latter part of Exodus is always like it's a challenge to teach, at least for me, okay, to teach to give drashot, but especially to teach the Rashi for the last half, because it's all instructions for the tabernacle and the vestments and so on. However, 2 weeks ago on Ki Tisah, there was a lot of stuff to cover, because it was the sin of the golden calf, and then Moses saying, basically, God, if you don't let me see your face, I'm out, find somebody else. And so God shows him his back, but not his face. And Moses goes up with has to hew a set of 2 new tablets and bring up the mountain and all that stuff. So there was like way more interesting material than we could possibly hope to cover. And now we're back to stuff that's highly technical. Mm-hmm. I am not going to say it's not worthwhile. It's just A, very difficult because it's highly technical. And B, at least, speaking just for me, I'm not necessarily, in all honesty, especially since I was out of town for 2 days this week, but not necessarily willing to put in the time to understand it in depth, because I don't yearn for the rebuilding of the temple and the reinstitution of the sacrificial rites and so on and so forth. So what the Kohanim wore is interesting, and if you go to Jerusalem, there's a little place where you can see garments that are made exactly according to the biblical direction, and it's interesting, but it's not like, oh, I need to understand this because, God willing, next week Mashiach will come and we'll rebuild the temple, and since I'm a Kohen, I have to know what to wear. And that, there are people who certainly believe that. There are people who certainly believe that, and all respect to them, but it's not me, okay? And actually, I'm going to speak Shabbos morning a little bit more about that whole. So, so there's one in particular that actually I brought it and I looked at it, and I don't understand it. So, my alternatives are 3 alternatives, I guess. One, I could have, taken it back out, and nobody but me would have been any the wiser. 2, I could say, well, even though I copied it for you, we're not going to look at it. Or 3, we could look at it and see if we can figure it out together, which I suspect is what we'll probably do. But so for 39:28, 39:28, yeah. And some of this, even the translations here are difficult. Okay, so the translation that we have from Chabad says, "And the cap of linen, and the glorious high hats of linen, and the linen pants of twisted fine linen." Let's look at Eitz Chaim. "And the headdress of fine linen, and the decorated turbans of fine linen, and the linen breeches of fine twisted linen. Okay, so the phrase that is translated, so the phrase is ve'et pa'arei hamigbaot shesh. Okay, you see that? It's right. Ve'et pa'arei hamigbaot shesh, which is translated, as I said, by Chabad into the glorious high hats of linen, and in the Eitz Chaim, the headdress of fine linen. Okay, so now if we look at Rashi, the et pe'arei hamigbaot, the glorious high hats. And if you went by the Eitz Chaim translation, the decorated turbans, the Rashi doesn't even make any sense, right? But
Not at all.
but even with the other translation, the Rashi is still hard to understand because he's commenting on a matter of Hebrew grammar. Okay, so and here's the problem: pe'erei hamigbaot. Okay, now bracketing the question of what migbaot exactly means, I will tell you that in modern Hebrew, if you say migvaat in singular, migbaot in plural, it does mean turban. Okay, but if you look at the shoresh geva, that means like a mountain. Okay, so high hats is perhaps not a bad translation. Right, but pe'arei hamigbaot, if you were to translate it literally, okay, whether you want to translate migbaot as turbans or high hats, the Hebrew doesn't say the glorious high hats. It says the glories of the high hats. Okay, that's the problem that Rashi is commenting on. Okay, because if it would be glorious high hats, it would be migbaot tiferet or something like that. But pe'arei hamigbaot means the glory of the migbaot. Right, that's the problem that Rashi is commenting. Okay, so he says tiferet hamigbaot, the glory of the high hats, hamigbaot hamifuarot, the glorious high hats. But see, this is a bad translation too, because mifuar, well, I guess actually the shorish, the root of mifu eret and tif eret is actually the same root. It's pei aleph resh, right? But mifuar means like, could you translate it as glorious? I guess so. Right, but that's what Rashi is commenting on, right? That the Hebrew locution is weird. The glories of the high hats, right?
What
And
does that mean? Yeah,
it means the glorious high hats,
right.
right? But if you were looking at it again, right, he is right. I mean, who is Rashi's original audience, right? Well, we know that they're French speakers. Right, I assume that he is writing his commentary pretty much for folks like you, right? The difference being that they knew Hebrew better than you guys know Hebrew, right? But that was the norm.
Yeah.
That was the norm. Certainly, not necessarily, not for women, in all honesty, right? But, and I remember I gave a sermon on this a few years ago, how all of the men in my family knew Hebrew enough to read and translate the Tanakh up until my dad. My grandfather knew, and I know, but that one generation didn't know, right? But that's historically unusual. I mean, Jews knew, right? Your grandparents. I don't know, but did your dad know enough know Hebrew? How about your grandfather?
I can't tell.
Okay.
I can't tell. I mean, he was mostly a Yiddish speaker.
Okay. But where was he educated? In Europe or here?
Educated.
Did he go to Heder?
No. Not that
Okay.
I know of. Not that I'm
Okay.
aware of.
All right. You know, you may
I
not.
they were not from a religious family
Okay, but at some point they were from a religious family.
at some point.
Right. So,
Abraham,
well, Abraham, more recently than Abraham. Perhaps less recently, somewhere between Abraham and Zadie.
Right.
Right?
Well,
From A to Z.
Right. Well, when I started
Right.
Hebrew school, I was one of two girls.
Right.
And my friend who lived in a Jewish neighborhood, the mother said girls don't need to know Hebrew.
Right.
I mean, my mother could read, like I can read, but I don't.
Right. Right. But what I'm saying is that, at least for men, right, the rampant Hebrew illiteracy of American Jewry is historically an anomaly. Is what I'm for the men.
For the men.
For the men.
I understand.
And in other countries, it's not necessarily so. Now, there are reasons for that. I mean, it has to do with the different school systems and so on, right? But for example, in Mexico, the vast majority of Jewish kids go to Jewish day schools, right? And in Brazil and Argentina, the same thing. In Australia, less so, but still a much higher percentage than here. And so, my sort of starting assumption, if I meet a Mexican Jew, is that we could probably have a conversation in Hebrew.
Do you think part of that is due to the fact that, and I don't know whether this is true or not, that maybe their public school system has a religious content that they don't,
or it's just not of enough quality.
Yeah.
And now it's also the case that and that's part of it too, is the religious part, is that the sort of extreme separation of religion and state is also an anomaly. I mean, in the UK, for example, Jewish day schools get government support. Okay, now it's a two-edged sword, because there was a case not that long ago, I mean, within the last 3-4 years, where a Jewish school that was government funded didn't want to accept a particular student because the student's mother had a conservative conversion rather than an Orthodox conversion, right? And the court said, no, you got to take them, right? I mean, and this is getting off track, and I'll get us back on track. But this is what the people, and I don't care whether that's, Orthodox Jews or Catholics or Protestants who don't want to send their kids to public school, and they want government money, okay? It's a Hebrew phrase, Bal Hamea, Bal Hadea, okay? It's, he who pays the piper calls the tune, right? And I mean, the chief rabbinate in the UK was furious. You're telling us that we have to accept this conversion that we don't accept? The state says, no, we're not telling you that. You don't have to do that. You only have to do that if you want us to continue funding your school.
You have to take our money.
Right. And that will happen. There's no question. All right. So you mentioned, yes. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just wondering. I was wondering if the way they translate this, like you had mentioned, turban or hi hat, would the translation perhaps have to do with the culture where the translation was made, so the ordinary person would know what they were referring to, as long as it was generally a good translation?
Well, the first part of your comment actually I think is correct, and it actually just hit me like a ton of bricks. All right. The second part less so, because I think anybody who is dependent enough on English to need an English translation knows what a turban is.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like, well, they know what a high hat means, but they don't know what the word turban means, right? However, the auspices, and this is a great point, and it blew me away, and you can either like what I'm going to say or dislike it, but the auspices of this translation is Chabad. They wear high hats.
Yes, that's right.
And they maintain, frankly, this fiction that the way that Chabad Jews live today is the way that they have always lived, right? So that by them, they wouldn't literally say this, but, if you look at children, right? Moshe spoke Yiddish and wore a black
and he wore a shtreimel.
coat and a shtreimel, right? So it makes more sense, frankly.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this is intentional. I'm not saying they go and say, well, how do we translate this so that it will? But it's unconscious, right? It's an unconscious thing. Just like songwriters who are, accused of plagiarizing tunes. Well, I didn't really sit down to plagiarize it. It was just in my head. It was unconscious, right? And I think so that there may be something there too, that to try and imagine a continuity that isn't actually there, so that high hats make more sense, because what kind of Jew wears a turban? Yeah, sure, Maimonides wore a turban, but he was Sephardic, and but real Jews wear black hats, not turbans, right? So I think there is something. Again, I'm not saying that it's intentional or ideological, but I think it may be really an unconscious influence from their own sort of historical mythology. All right. So, all right, let's work through the next comment. Okay. Right. Well, the problem is not the techelet. Okay. The problem is to place over the cap from above. Okay, or to fix upon the headdress above. Okay, so that's the problem. Vayitnu, and part of the problem is, how do you translate these terms, right? But the patil techelet is not the problem. Okay, we all know what a patil techelet is. Okay, even if Rashi may not have known precisely what the formula or the animal is, right? He knew that it was a chilazon. The question is identifying a chilazon, what actually is a chilazon, right? Because nobody was speaking Hebrew as their first language, right? So that's how the meanings of certain words got lost. If people were continuously speaking Hebrew as their first language, they would know what a chilazon is, right? Because, we know what a dog is, right? If you're native English, you know what is a dog, what is a cat, right? You could live we know what kangaroos are, right? We don't live in a country where there are kangaroos. I don't know, some of you may never have seen a kangaroo in person, but you still know what it is, right? But anyway, but that's the problem. What does it mean to have the cord of blue from above? Okay, mi lamala. Okay, that's the problem. So let's just read the Eitz Chaim translation. They attached to it a cord of blue to fix it upon the headdress above, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Okay. To place over the cap from above, and by means of the threads he would place them over the cap like a sort of crown. Okay? It is impossible to say that the show plate was over the cap because in Shchitat Kodashim, we learned the Kohen Gadol's hair was visible between the show plate and the cap.
What is the show plate?
All right. The show, what?
No, go ahead.
All right. The show plate, all right, the Hebrew word is tzitz, okay? And I don't know exactly what tzitz is, right? And I thought maybe, like, I looked at a couple of other places to see if there was, like, a diagram that would help to explain this. But because this is not used, all right, yeah, it is. The frontlets for the whole, all right, so in Eitz Chaim, he translates the word seats as frontlet. They made the frontlet for the holy diadem of pure gold and incised upon it the seal inscription, Holy to the Lord.
Oh, so it's sort of like, it's because it said somewhere to hang it upon the cap. So it's sort of like a plaque or something.
Yeah.
That would go in front
Right.
of the,
So let me.
So where he would place it to fill it.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, that's the same word, frontlet. Let me see if I can find, like, picture of.
where he would place the horn. So it would be on his forehead. And the hair was supposed to show through.
Okay. I got a chart here. Oh, wait, let me go back.
And only from ear to ear.
Fortunately, the Wi-Fi in here is so slow that. All right, so I'm trying to. Okay, gold plate attached by a blue cord to the mitre or headband.
You see? Okay, that's sort of what I visualized
Right.
after reading this.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a turban,
Yeah.
basically, and then the gold plate is attached to it by a blue cord. Attached to it by a blue cord. Okay.
Would this be the same blue as the blue?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the same word. The word is techelet.
Oh.
Okay. And specifically patil. a patil means like a cord or a thread.
Mhm.
I mean, it's hard sometimes to translate word for word because like a wick
Mhm.
is also a patil.
Mm.
Okay. Whereas you wouldn't call what's on the tzitzit and a wick,
Yeah.
you wouldn't use the same word in English,
Right.
right? But if you looked at them in the abstract, you really couldn't tell the difference, right? I mean, what does a thread of a tzitzit if it's not in a tzitzit, or a wick that's not embedded in a candle? It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right? It's just the usage of it that gives us the different words. So, patil techelet means a thread of blue or a cord of blue, but the techelet, the blue, is that specific color, just like from the tzitzit. Okay. So his hair was visible between the show plate and the cap. All right. So his hair would have been according to the Talmud.
Mhm.
That's what Rashi is saying. According to the Talmud, his hair would have been visible between the gold thing and the turban itself. Okay, where he would place the tefillin, and the show plate was placed on the Kohen Gadol's forehead. Okay, hence the cap was above and the show plate was below. So what is the meaning of over the cap from above? Right? Are we following this so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Additionally, I found a problem in this matter, namely that here the text states, and they placed upon it a cord of blue wool. And in the section dealing with the commandment, it says, and you shall place upon it a cord of blue wool, right? The tzitzit. Therefore, I say that this cord of blue wool was composed of threads with which to tie it to the cap, since the show plate extended only from ear to ear. Thus, how should he, the Kohen Gadol, tie it onto his forehead? Threads of blue wool were fastened to it at both its ends and at its center, with which he would tie it and hang it upon the cap when it was on his head. 2 threads were at each end, one above and one below toward his forehead, and similarly at its center. For it is easy to tie it in this way, and it is not customary to tie with fewer than 2 threads. Therefore it says, upon a cord of blue wool, and upon it a cord of blue wool, and he would tie their 2 ends, all of them together behind him, opposite his nape, and he would place it upon the cap. All right, are we following this so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so explain it to me, because I've been just...
Well, okay, I can, the part of it I don't follow. I can see where you get the 2 threads where you attach it,
Right.
and you get the middle one, but then he's tying it behind his head.
Right. Okay. But if you assume, if you assume that the seats is like, I'm thinking like Wonder Woman's thing, right? So it has to be tied, right? You would if it went right, if it went like from here to here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you would have the cords, and you would tie the cords behind. Now, maybe he wouldn't personally tie them.
He wouldn't tie them.
He wouldn't tie them. Somebody would tie them for them, and another one up here, and also to tie it, right? And then it's pretty firm. It's pretty firm, and you could see, and you would be able, and if the turban was here, and the
right, the foreplate would be here, and the turban would be. The hair is going to show because what they did. Where does the tefillin?
Well, the tefillin really goes here. Okay. I mean, a lot of men don't wear their tefillin properly. Okay,
if
because
the tefillin goes here, that means the cap would have to be further back.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times you see with the tefillin like right here. That's not proper.
Okay.
They really should be up here, because people think between their eyes, but it's measuring here, okay, not here. right? Because otherwise it should be like on your nose,
I know. That'd be a little hard.
right?
It's hard to visualize
Yeah.
that but it's the way.
Right, and that's why Rashi is saying it's a problem, okay? Do not be astonished that it does not say cords of blue wool, since there were many, because we find in regard to the Hoshen, that's the breastplate and the ephod, and they shall fasten the Hoshen by its rings to the rings of the ephod with a blue cord. That we are forced to explain that there were no fewer than 2 threads, even though the text states cord in the singular, because the 2 rings of the Hoshen were on the 2 ends of the Hoshen, and the 2 rings of the ephod were on the 2 shoulder straps of the ephod opposite them. According to the usual way of tying rings together, there were 4 threads. In any case, fewer than 2 threads is impossible. All right. I mean, I think there's a simpler answer. I mean, if you look even at the threads of the techelet of the tzitzit, it's 1 cord woven together, just like a rope.
Well, that's
right?
what
You
it
don't
is. It's,
right. You don't say ropes. You say a rope. Even though if you untwisted the rope, you would get lots of different strands. Right.
And the same thing. A cord is also a multiple strands.
Right.
Twisted together.
Right. Couldn't it have been just a thicker cord altogether? I mean.
Right, but it's still called a cord. It's not called cords.
Right.
Right. I mean and there's a phrase actually, chut hamishulash, the 3-fold cord. Right. That the 3-fold cord is stronger. Even a 2-fold cord is easily broken, but a 3-fold cord is harder. It's harder to break. So, do we have? Let me just see if the Hertz Chumash. Sometimes the Hertz Chumash has pictures. I wasn't intrigued by this at the time that I was preparing the class, but now I kind of am.
Well, sometimes you get into a discussion of something, and you get argument or lack thereof, or how we visualize it.
All right, so this is 39:31.
Trying to visualize how in the world could have done any of the ceremonial duties with all this stuff on his head. I mean, you think it would fall off or get in his eyes? Or...
So this is the way this is secured. And it had to be heavy.
Right. If it was gold.
All right, doesn't say. Doesn't say. All right. Okay. 32. Thus was completed all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. The Israelites did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses, so they did. Okay, but V'yasu b'nei Yisrael et malacha k'chol asher tzivah Hashem v'gomer. The children of Israel had done the work according to all that the Lord had commanded. Oh, okay. All right, so here's the problem. All right, all the work, right, of the Mishkan, of the tent of meeting was completed. All right, again, it's a Hebrew problem, okay? So I'm going to retranslate it and break it down differently. But Tachel Kol Avodat Mishkan Ohel Moed. All the work of the Mishkan, of the tent of meeting, was completed. Period.
Okay.
Okay. V'ya'asu v'nei Yisrael kechol asher tziva Adonai et Moshe kenasu. And the children of Israel did everything that the Lord had commanded Moses, thus they did. And if you put a period there, you know that that's wrong, right? They did, right? I mean, right? You see what I'm saying? Make it two senses. The work of the tabernacle was completed. The Jews did everything God told them to do. But we know that they didn't, right? We know that they did it. They didn't before and they didn't after, right? And they're still not. Right? So what Rashi is saying, this verse doesn't mean the Jews did everything that God told them to do. It means they made the tabernacle the way God told them to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
That's what Rashi is saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because he knows. Okay. V'yaviu et hamishkan el Moshe. They brought the Mishkan to Moses. Et ha'ohel ve'et kol kelav, the tent and all of its furnishings. Krashav, its clasps, its planks. Berichav, its bars. Va'amudav, its socket, its pillars and its sockets. Okay. They brought the Mishkan to Moses. All right. Now, so now Rashi's commenting on they brought the Mishkan, etc. What's the problem before we dive into the solution?
They brought it to Moses with its furnishing and clasp that's not put together.
Maybe it's not put together.
We don't know that.
Or if it is, yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah. They brought it to Moses.
Why would they move it?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Bring Moses to it.
Bring Moses to it, right? It's a big thing, right? Don't bring the mountain to Muhammad. Bring Muhammad to the mountain, right? Exactly. Shelo hayu yecholin lahakimo. They could not erect it. Okay? They could not erect it. V'lefi shelo asa Moshe shum melacha b'mishkan, haniach lo hakadosh baruch hu hakamato. Since Moses had not done any of the work of building the Mishkan, God left erecting it to Moses, okay? Because I remember we saw in a previous parsha that, at least according to Rashi, it was not completely disassembled. It was just, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like if you have a box, right? And you can push it and the whole thing flattens, right? And then you can carry it flat, and then you can push it back and it stands again, right? That's, according to Rashi, how the Mishkan was. It was not disassembled. It stayed all assembled. It was just like
the pieces collapsed.
The pieces collapsed, right. It was collapsible.
Into a box.
Right, it was collapsible. And they collapsed it, and then they moved it. But when they moved it, it was still put together. It wasn't disassembled, it was just collapsed. Okay? So when Rashi says erecting it, he literally means erecting it, right? It was collapsed and it needs to be erect. And since Moshe had no part in the previous construction, so God left the actual erecting to him. Shelo haya yechol hakimo shum adam michamat koved hakarashim. Okay, no human being could erect it himself because of the weight of the planks. She'ein koach ba'adam l'zakfan u'moshe hamido. That no human being was strong enough to put them up, but Moses was strong enough to put them up. All right, so Moses had superhuman strength,
yeah.
right? So similar to me when my wife says, "Here, open this jar for me," right?
Gotta get a tool.
What?
Gotta get a tool.
I have superhuman strength.
Gotta get a tool.
Superhuman strength. I don't need no stinking tool, right?
When you get to be a certain age, you need a tool.
I know.
Because your hands so
Believe me, I'm almost there. I'm almost there. Right? But Moses had no human being could erect because the planks were so heavy, but Moses could do it. Amar Moshe lefnei Kodesh Baruch Hu, Ech afshar hakamato al yedei adam. So Moses says to God, Ech afshar hakamato al yedei adam. How is it possible for a human being to erect it? Amar lo, asok ata biyadecha nir'a kamo. You work with your hand. Okay, so just do it. In other words, this is out of order a little bit, right? I mean, because we already saw Moses erected it. But now this is before Moses erected it. He says, look, even I can't do this, right? And God says, just do it, okay? He was the original Nike. Moses appeared to be erecting it, and it arose by himself. Okay. Yeah. How do we know this? Because in the next chapter, right, in 40:17, we're going to see. All right, so look at verse 17, right, the first verse in Shishi. Vayihi b'chodesh harishon. Thus it was in the first year, b'shana, the first month rather, b'shana hashenit, b'echad l'chodesh, the first day of the second month, hukam ha-mishkan. All right, that's passive. It's a pu'al. The tabernacle was erected, not hekimu et ha-mishkan, not they erected the mishkan, but hukam ha-mishkan. The tabernacle was erected. It arose by itself. Okay, so and actually, it actually wasn't even Moses. Well, it was Moses, but not by means of superhuman physical strength, so much as superhuman spiritual strength, right? Yeah. Telekinesis. Moses erected the tabernacle. The tabernacle was all put together, but it was collapsed, and it needed to be erected, and too heavy, nobody could do it. Moses was able to do it by telekinesis.
But it says he set up the tabernacle, placing its sockets, and so doesn't that mean he actually did the work? I mean,
where?
In 17, 17, was set up. Moses set up the tabernacle, placing its sockets. 18.
It does.
18.
Yeah.
It does.
So, I mean, it sounds like he physically, actually, did it.
Yeah, it does. I have no answer to that. Again, it also seems out of order, right? Yeah. Because we've already read that the tabernacle. So maybe my only answer to this is that when they say Moses did it, it's like saying, lahavdil, Trump built the Grand Hyatt. No, illegal Polish construction workers built the Grand Hyatt, but it was at Trump's direction, right? Because according to Rashi, Moshe did not physically participate in the construction of the Mishkan at all. So if it says Moses did this and Moses did that, my only answer is it was done under the direction of Moses and thus attributed to Moses. Right? But this also has to be after because it's already been erected.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what about moving it from place to place in the desert?
They moved it, collapsed, but put together. I mean, that's what Rashi says. I mean,
it's hard to.
I don't get that from the reading, my own reading, but.
No, I don't either. Okay, but that's what Rashi says,
and
right? Didn't we read that a couple weeks ago?
Yeah.
Right? No, I agree with you. I mean, look. When you ask a question like that, okay, there are two difficulties in answering the question, right? The first is a traditional question, which I think is acceptable in any context, right? Which is, does Rashi's description of how something happened comport with the text itself, right? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, right? Now, if you want to ask a meta question beyond that, like what really happened, there's no way to answer that, right? There's no way to answer that. I mean, I assume that these discussions reflect a certain historical reality, right? In other words, I think that our people has an ancestral memory of spending a long time in the desert and having a portable sanctuary that they moved with them from place to place, right? Did it have the dimensions that the Torah said? Did it look like the Torah said? Did they disassemble it to move it from place to place or just collapse it from place to place? I don't know how you would know that. You take that on faith. It's not objective knowledge in the same sense that, history is supposed to be objective knowledge. But I agree with you. I don't assume, I mean, I would say in most cases, Rashi helps us understand the actual text better in most cases, but not necessarily in every case. And sometimes what Rashi says does not seem to comport with the original intention of the author with a big A or author with a small a of the text. I absolutely agree with you. But that's what Rashi says, right? I mean, we read that, right? That it was not completely disassembled, it was just collapsed. Right? Now that's pretty big. I mean, it's 100 cubits by 50 cubits, right? So that's big.
Well, with the term, but then with pieces of it, another point is that in Leviticus, where the different subtribes of Levi are assigned to carry different, as they move to carry different parts of the tent of meeting.
Right, but they could still be carrying it. Doesn't mean they were carrying it disassembled.
Yeah.
Well,
in my head, I always pictured it disassembled. Yeah, but again, with these times change, these stories are repeated so many times before they were written down. So there is an element of what actually happened in there, but it's also gotten very elaborated,
For sure.
which is how I look at them. Sometimes
Right.
these things are hard to imagine, but
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I mean, I assume, like I say, I assume that there was a period of dwelling in the desert, and there was a portable tabernacle, right? Was it
that massive,
Right.
who knows?
massive? Who knows? Was it 600,000 men, or was it fewer? Who knows, right? So I'm not, right. In other words,
about those points.
right. In other words, I think it reflects an ancestral memory.
Right.
Right? Whether that memory is 100% accurate in every detail is a faith question.
Yeah,
It's not a historical.
Right.
I mean, or an archaeological question. I mean, I suppose they could find it, but I mean, I don't even think it tells us what happened. What happened to the Mishkan? I don't even know. Do you? I mean, when they entered the land of Israel, they crossed the Jordan. What happened to the Mishkan?
Well, didn't they carry it?
They carried the ark.
They carried the ark, but we don't hear anything about the Mishkan after that.
No.
I'm thinking of just a little bit that is going through Joshua and the other things that really.
Right.
The ark is the only thing.
We hear about the ark.
Yeah.
Right, but we don't hear about the Mishkan, and we know, but yet there was a period of several hundred years
before the temple
was built. Right. So I don't know what happened to the Mishkan. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I never
thought about
never
that.
thought about it before.
You just mentioned it.
But yeah, I don't know. I'll see if anybody knows.
I think it's kind of interesting that they thought all these details were so important, as to include them in Holy Scripture. I mean, there's so many minute little details. You would have thought that they would have thought, well, I mean, that they were that important to put down. I mean, that's why, I agree with you. You can't necessarily say every little detail is correct, but it's interesting that they thought that all these details were so important.
Right.
Especially if, when it was written down, a lot of this was like, kind of the details were forgotten, some of it, but yet they still thought it was interesting to put down what they thought.
It was carried with an oral,
right.
Oral, and then again, as things get changed.
No, but there's also a certain sense. Okay, now this is Professor Eisen's commentary on Leviticus and not on Exodus, right? But it's the same type of material, right? I mean, in-depth discussion of things that we haven't done for 2,000 years, and most modern Jews don't necessarily want to go back to doing them again. So what's the point? Okay, and Eisen's commentary, and I think he's absolutely right, and I know I also quoted this once on Yom Kippur, is that we live in a world where most of the time we don't get things right. Right? I mean, if you think about it, right? If you were a spouse or are a spouse, are you or were you at all times the spouse that you could have been? No, right? I mean, most of us would say B plus, A minus, or A plus. I don't know. Certainly not me. Am I as perfect in my work as I would like to be? No. Right? Am I as good a friend as I could be? No. If I'm a parent, am I as good a parent as I could be? No. I mean, in other words, right? I mean, all of us, we're like B plus, A minus, and that's pretty good, but it's not perfect, right? And ritual is something that you can actually get right. You can get it right. now this is my midrash on Eisen's midrash. Why? Because there are rules, and the rules are circumscribed, and you can know immediately, did I do it right? Did I not do it right? And it's not infinite, and it's not endless, right? I mean, I built the Mishkan, and now it's built, right? I fasted for 24 hours, and now I'm done, right? But like, for example, I mean, the sages, right? Because before you do a mitzvah, there's a bracha, right? Right? You shake the lulav, there's a bracha. You light the Shabbos candles, there's a bracha, right? You wash your hands before eating, there's a bracha, right? A bris, there's a bracha. A pidyon haben, there's a bracha, right? Why is there no bracha for giving tzedakah?
Never thought about that.
Yes, right.
Right?
Yeah.
Why is there no bracha for giving tzedakah? Why not?
Of course.
Stuff is a blessing in itself.
Well, but so is it, are all these other things. I mean, the two explanations that I know are first of all, there's a guy waiting for your tzedakah, right? So he has to wait until you finish the bracha? No, give it to him now, right? But the second is, there's no, like, you've lit the Shabbos candles and they're lit.
Oh, no completion.
There's no completion.
Yeah.
There's no completion. I'm done giving tzedakah? No.
You're going to continue doing
Right.
it. But the other things that you've done the blessing and you've done the
Right. So rituals are things that have directions, right, and limits. They're circumscribed, and you can say, "I did it right." In that sense, it's like music, right? If you're practicing a certain symphony, you say, "I got that right. I got that right." But and rituals we can get right. Life we can't get right. Right? So
we tried, but
right. So maybe these complicated rules are actually a blessing, right? Because it's also, I mean, like, to have a sense of accomplishment, something should be difficult but possible, right? If it's impossible, you're going to give up, right? And if it's easy, you're not going to feel any sense of accomplishment, right? Like when I had to write my thesis, right? I was a lazy student, okay? I was a lazy student because I was blessed with sort of raw intellect, and I always got good grades without having to work very hard, okay? But when I was in grad school and I had to write my thesis, I said to so I chose the hardest professor on the faculty to write my thesis with. Okay, now why did I do that? Okay, because I said to myself, I could churn out 150 pages of dreck, and it would still be a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work to turn out 150 pages of dreck. So if I'm going to work that hard, might as well work a little bit harder and write something that's actually worthwhile. And if I work with Professor Meyer, he's going to make me do that, right? Because, even most of my professors, I could fool them, right? I could not work very hard and still get an A, but you couldn't do that with Meyer. Okay, if you got an A from Meyer, you earned an A. Right, and if he approved your thesis, it was a good, solid piece of work, right? And the result is that 34 years later, I mean, it's a very narrow subject, as most theses are, but it is still the definitive work on the subject. And every once in a while, I mean, it's easier now with Google because every time my name appears in print, I get an alert, right? And my thesis is still used as source material for scholarly articles and stuff like that because it's the standard work on the subject. Why? Because I purposely set out to do it the hard way rather than the easy way, which is not usually the way I am, but it was, right? And so I get your point, but I think that that's maybe the reason behind this stuff being so intricate and so complicated, so that, yeah, it's tough, but it's doable, right? I mean, if something is a mitzvah, right, God often commands us to do stuff that we don't want to do. God never commands us to do stuff that's impossible. So thank you for the discussion. Okay. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Just one quick, like.